Good afternoon. I'm Samantha Fultz, the Esquire president here at Chatham Central High School. The Students for Acceptance Club and I would like to welcome our honored guests, Dr. Carolyn Happer and Mr. Morris Glass, as well as the faculty, staff, and students of Chatham Central to today's assembly. I have the privilege of introducing the co-author and historian for the book chosen for destruction, Dr. Carolyn Happer. Dr. Happer teaches history at Meredith College in Raleigh, North Carolina. She taught two of our history teachers, Mrs. Albright and Mrs. King, while they were students at Meredith. While her specialty is Southern U.S. history, for many years she has taught a course about the Jewish Holocaust. Through teaching this course, she became involved with the North Carolina Holocaust Council. There she met Mr. Morris Glass. She felt compelled to write a book exposing the atrocities the Polish Jews experienced at the hands of the Nazis. Mr. Glass agreed to cooperate with her in writing a book about his life as a young man in the Holocaust. We wish to thank Dr. Happer for her efforts in shedding light on this history and for sharing her book, Chosen for Destruction, with our faculty and students. Please join in welcoming Dr. Carolyn Happer.
Can y'all hear me back there? Yeah. Good, because every time I have a microphone, I want to sing. I'm not sure you're ready for that. I'm so glad to be here with you today, especially since this is the school where two of my former students are teaching, and I know that Amy and her husband graduated from here, and I think Adrian, you did also. So it has to be a terrific school to have these products. Today I'm here to introduce Morris Glass. I first met Morris about 8 years ago when he was the main speaker, the keynote speaker at the North Carolina Holocaust commemoration. He spoke on a hot Sunday afternoon to about 800 people for 40 minutes, and you could have heard a pin drop. During that whole time, everyone was riveted to what he was saying. And I was not only riveted, but I was so moved by his story that after the commemoration ceremony was over, I went up to him and I said, Mr. Glass, you need to have your story reach a wider audience. Would you consider letting me write your story? And he agreed, and I was delighted. I was delighted, first of all, because I felt the story was so compelling that everybody should have an opportunity to read it. But I was also delighted because as a teacher of the Holocaust, I realized that there was a dearth of books about the experience of the Polish Jews. Now, I know when you think about the Holocaust, you start thinking about Germany. And indeed, without Germany and the efficiency and of the Germans, there would never have been a Holocaust. But indeed, the center of the Holocaust was in Poland. All of the death camps, 6 death camps, were located in Poland for the very reason that this was the center of the world's Jewish population. Some 85% of the world's Jews in 1938 lived in the area of Poland and its eastern neighbors. 1/2 of all of the victims of the Holocaust were Polish Jews. And unfortunately, there just isn't much written about these people. And so I was delighted with the thought that maybe I could reach a wide audience and let them know what had been the experience of the Polish Jews. Another reason I was so delighted to write his story was because Morris was in the Holocaust from the very beginning to the very end. His town was invaded the first week of September of 1939 when World War II began and he was in the Holocaust until the very end in May of 1945. That is about as long, that is as long as you could be in the Holocaust. Furthermore, his experiences in the Holocaust covered most of the areas of the experiences of the European Jews, with the one exception that he did not experience the open-air shootings that took place on the Eastern Front, in which approximately 1.5 million people Jews were shot. And this is a story that's just beginning to be told. But he did experience ghettos. He was in 2 ghettos. He was in the longest lasting ghetto. He was on the cattle cars being taken to Auschwitz. He was in Auschwitz, and then he was in the Dachau camps. You probably are familiar with the place of Dachau, but it involved some 150 sub-camps, and he was in 5 different ones of these. So I just felt that his story illuminated so much of what happened during the Holocaust. So anyhow, we started working on the book. I have a tower of CDs from all the interviews I took that I had with him. I have several thick notebooks of in which the interviews were transcribed. It was wonderful to get to know Morris through all of these interviews. And for me, the greatest part of the whole experience was getting to know him. And you will get some feeling of what kind of person he is when he speaks. But for someone who had out of a family that included 42 uncles and aunts and first cousins in 1938, only 3 survived. From a person who saw such horrible things happen to people he was close to and just was surrounded by horror. He is just an amazing person. He is cheerful, he is optimistic, he is buoyant, he is tolerant. He sees the best in everybody and everything, has a joy of living. And so today I'm so happy that you have the opportunity to get to know my friend, Holocaust survivor, Morris Glass.
I was born and raised in Pabianice, Poland, a town of about 70,000 with 12,000 Jews. Can you hear me okay? We lived what was then considered a luxury apartment with a toilet and a bathtub. Keep in mind that this was the 30s and it was Poland. My father was quite well-to-do. That's why we could afford to live so in a really beautiful apartment. He owned a huge textile mill. I was attending public schools, and I was very, very active, especially in sports. I was involved in many different sports, primarily soccer. I had a very caring and very loving family, and I had a very, very happy childhood. And all this came to an end on September the 1st, 1939, when Second World War broke out. I was 11 years old. Within about a week or so, the German army occupied our city. The first thing they did is they burnt down our main beautiful synagogue with all the holy scriptures and the Torahs and the praying shawl and the praying books and everything in it. And then they used it as a stable for the horses. The radios and the telephones were confiscated. The Jewish schools were closed. And then, a while later, a ghetto was formed. We were forced to live in a few square blocks in the old city. That means that the Jewish people who lived in those few square blocks had to absorb all the families from who lived out there. For instance, we had a nice apartment. We took in 2 families and a lady dentist. Once the ghetto was formed, everybody had to work. You didn't work, you didn't get any rations. We produced many valuable items for the German Nazi machine. Food was very scarce. What kept us alive, what kept us going, is the fact that we were still with our families and our faith. And this too came to an end on May the 15th of 1942, when the orders came to liquidate the Pabianic ghetto. At which point we were told to march to this huge sport complex outside of the city, and out of nowhere there were a few hundred SS stormtroopers who took over. And they were in charge, and the selections were made. The elderly and the sick and the children were taken away, and then they went after the babies. And we stood there in absolute horror when one of the SS stormtroopers grabbed the baby out of the arms of his mother and threw it against the concrete wall. The baby fell dead to the ground. This was the brutal and sadistic way of the SS stormtroopers. In spite of it, the mothers refused to part with their children. So they were beaten to a point where they no longer could resist. It was an evening on a night that I shall never forget. There was a pile of infants laying 6 or 7 high, crying their little hearts out. It just cannot be described. Eventually, the crying and the pleading and the begging was going on for hours and hours. Eventually, they were all taken away, never to be seen again. And the rest of us, the able bodies, were taken into the Lodz ghetto. Now, Lodz, geographically, was only a few miles away from our city. But Lodz was the second largest city in Poland, with a population of 750,000 and about 250,000 Jewish people. When we came into the Lodz ghetto, out of the 250,000, there were only 90,000 left. Lodz ghetto, it was hell. In Lodz ghetto, there were anywhere between 300 or 400 people dying every single day. They no longer could keep up with digging individual graves, so they were buried in unmarked mass graves. Now you wonder why they gave us so little food. Because the Jews in the Lodz ghetto produced an incredible amount of very valuable goods for the German Nazis. Starting there were 3 huge metal factories that were working day and night, and we were making all different kinds of parts for the Nazis. We didn't know what they were, but they gave us the specs, and whatever they told us were made. We made furniture. We made civilian clothing and uniforms for the German military, shoes and boots. I mean, every possible thing. And at that time, 2 of the items that I want to mention specifically were, there were two huge factories with teenage girls working there, and they were making straw shoes. At the time, Germany was already at war with Russia, and they were sent to the Eastern Front, and the German soldiers wore them on their boots to prevent their feet from being frostbitten. Because, as you know, the winters in Russia are brutal. In addition, there were other two very important factories. They were making ski masks and earmuffs, and they also were sent to the Eastern Front. So these were very valuable items for the German Nazis. And yet, there was so little food. In Lodz Ghetto was not unusual. If a dear one passed away in the family, they kept the body for 6 or 8 days until the rations came out so they can benefit from the extra food. It was also, especially men, they just couldn't take it anymore. So when the rations came out, they ate it like in the next 2 or 3 days, and then they were found dead laying on the streets. Again, it's hard for me to understand why they gave us so little food. And again, what kept us going and what kept us alive is the fact that we were still with our families and our incredible faith. And this too came to an end in the beginning of the summer of 1944, in the spring of 1944, when the orders came to liquidate the Lodz Ghetto. At which point we were taken into cattle cars, and we were on our way to Auschwitz. After 3 or 4 days, we arrived at the infamous Auschwitz. When we disembarked, the men were ordered to go to the right, the women went to the left. I saw my mom and my 2 sisters. I waved to them, they waved back, and I never saw them again. My father and my brother continued to walk until we faced the infamous Dr. Mengele, better known as the Angel of Death, who was in charge of the selection. My father went first, then my brother, and when it came my turn, he sort of hesitated, because I was nothing but a skinny kid. But what saved me is the fact that my father worked in this clothing distribution center in the Lodz Ghetto, and he brought me this plaid coat with huge shoulder pads, and I wore that coat, and it made me look like I was a man, but I was not but a skinny kid. After hesitation, he let me go through. We kept marching until we came into this huge building. We were told to totally undress. Our heads were shaven, the underarms were disinfected, and we went in to take the showers. After we took the showers, we were given a pair of striped pants and a shirt and a hat. And I walked outside, I looked around, I was trying to find my father. I couldn't find him. The man was standing right next to me. I didn't recognize my own father. This man aged 30 years in those few hours because he realized where we found ourselves. I suppose I was too young to comprehend Auschwitz. How does one possibly describe Auschwitz? Auschwitz was miles of concentration camps, surrounded by high voltage electric wire, and every 70 or 80 yards there was a tower, and on top there was a SS stormtrooper with a machine gun. Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a place when there were thousands of people coming in every single day from every corner of Europe, from as far as Greece, Romania, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, France, of course Poland, and so on. And the selections were made, and the elderly and the sick and their children were taken away into the gas chambers and crematoriums, and the able-bodied were sent into the camps, and eventually they were sent into the many of hundreds of concentration camps in Germany and in Austria. Auschwitz had 4 huge crematoriums operating 24/7, and the smell and the stench of burning human flesh is so distinct that it cannot be confused with anything else. And many a days when I looked up at the chimney and I saw the smoke belching out, I was wondering whose turn is it next? My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. Auschwitz. In addition of sending thousands to their death every single day, the angel of death was also in charge of the most heinous, brutal, and sadistic experiments performed in modern history, starting with partial and radical castration on the finest specimen of man. I bunked with 2 of them, and I saw them naked. It just broke your heart. And the women, I saw them when we went by the experiment camp. Their heads shaven, their faces marred with excruciating pain, walking on all 4s, not even the slightest resemblance to a human being. And the children, the favorite of the angel of death was to break rifle butts on the heads of the children to see how many it would take for the brain to be totally shattered. Auschwitz. My brother was taken away and he was sent to a camp in northern Germany. And it was on the eve of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which is the holiest day for the Jewish people. And the Nazis were very well aware of that because there were always additional shootings or hanging, some kind of a punishment. And it was on the eve of Yom Kippur that the SS stormtroopers came into our particular camp. By the way, our camp was called Zigeunerlager. That means a gypsy camp. Before the men from the large ghetto came in, there were 35,000 Romas in this camp. And they were all taken, of course, into the gas chambers and crematorium, and they were all killed. But the name still remained the gypsy camp, Zigeunerlager. So it was on the eve of Yom Kippur that the SS stormtroopers came into our camp, and they demanded 700 teenagers. My sister's boyfriend, Nonik, had some privileges in this block. So he realized what was going on, and he grabbed me, and he threw me under his bunk, and he covered me with a blanket. The reason I said that he had some privileges, because we didn't sleep in bunks. We slept on the bare concrete, no blankets, no pillows, whatever he said, that's where you slept. There were like anyways between 1,100 and 1,200 men in every block in our camp. And as I was lying there quietly listening as they were rounding up those teenagers, and they were marching towards the gas chambers, crying and pleading and praying. After this terrible night was over, my father did not know what had happened to me. When my father saw me in the morning, he came over to me. He gave me a big hug and a kiss, and he said to me, "Morris, this is pure hell. We must get out of here. And as I was telling you, there were daily transports going into many hundreds of camps in Germany and in Austria. We very quickly registered and were taken into a cattle car. We were on our way to Germany. Little did we know what was awaiting us. After several days, we arrived in a concentration camp called Kaufering, which is a satellite of Dachau. After about a couple of weeks, we were taken into a different camp called Kaufbeuren, also a satellite of Dachau. Now, Kaufbeuren was considered by the German Nazis as a Vernichtungslager. That means a camp of destruction. There were 1,200 men originally that came from Auschwitz to Kaufbeuren. We were a group of 350. When we came into that camp, there were only 500 left. 700 were dead already. Kaufbeuren is almost impossible to describe. It is very difficult, especially to the young people who are so fortunate like yourself to live in this greatest country in the world. It's very difficult to imagine what hunger is, real hunger. It's impossible to imagine. When they woke us up, and I would say it was 4 in the morning. I mean, we had no way of knowing. All I can tell you is that when we left the camp, it was dark, and when we came back from after the day was over, it was dark. But it must have been around 4 or so. We were given what they call coffee. It was Ersatzkaffee, imitation coffee, was made from the shells of corn. They burned it, and anyway, that's what we got. And we marched several miles into this complex, and my father and I were assigned to dig foundations with pick and shovel. It's almost impossible for me to imagine. I don't think my father ever held a hammer in his hand. But that's what we were assigned to, and that's what we did. 12 o'clock, we were given soup. That was the main meal of the day. And the soup was made from peels of potatoes, but it was hot and it was great. When we came back into the camp at night, we were given a slice of bread and a little thing of margarine. My father got too weak. He could no longer go to the work detail. So he stayed behind in the bunk. When I would come home at night, we slept together in the same bunk. He was talking to me. I was half dead myself. I was so exhausted. But I remember he was telling me that he used to get beatings almost every day. But there were no marks on his face or anywhere. See, the Nazis know exactly how to punish you, how to beat you without leaving any marks. And the reason he used to get the beatings is because they wanted him to go into the sick bay. And he knew once he goes into the sick bay, it's a matter of a day. Nobody lasted more than a day. So he was hoping and praying that he would regain his strength, he'd be able to go to the work details. I can tell you many, many stories that had happened, but the one in particular stands out because when we used to get up in the morning, they counted us and they gave the report, and the same thing at night. And I remember the report Führer used to tell the German camp commander how many dead and how many sick. And I only remember that the camp commander used to say, nicht genug, not enough. And so this one evening, when we came back from the work detail, they told us to get undressed, to take off our shirts. And this friend of mine, I knew him for a long time, was a Hungarian Jew, Shandov. He worked in a quarry. So to keep a little warm, he took a piece of the cement sack and put it on his body to keep warm, because the winters in Bavaria are brutal. And for this, the camp commander beat him to death. I know that he was dead because the next morning they came in and they dragged my father from the bunk, and I followed him. And they took him into the shack. And I stood there in total disbelief when they were pulling the teeth from his mouth. His body was still warm. You see, in those days, in Europe, in Poland, if you needed a crown, it was made from gold. So they killed him for that. And to pay the final respect to my father, I volunteered for the burial commando that nobody really wanted to do, because we knew each other. And the burial commando consisted of a blanket with 4 inch, with 4 men, everybody holding on to one end. We put 5 or 6 bodies in there, and we walked outside of the camp. There was a huge pit, and 2 of them let go, and the bodies just fell into the pit. We repeated that 5 or 6 different times until they were all buried. When I was done, I came back into my block. And the block the head of the block says to me, "What are you doing here? How come you didn't go to your regular work detail?" I says, "Well, I just finished the burial detail." He says, "Well, I shouldn't have done it because they're short-handed. And for this, I'm going to get 50 lashes on my behind." So they waited until everybody came home from the work detail, and everybody was ordered to come and to watch. Even the German commander came in. It was showtime. And they took me, pulled me over the table, pulled down my pants, at which time the German commander said, "No 25, only 25 lashes, because I'm a teenager." But the truth of the matter is that after the first 3 or 4 or 5, you're sort of numb. But I still have the scars to prove it. After they were done, my friends pulled me over somehow to the bunk, and by a miracle, I guess, they found some rags and they soaked them in snow, and they were taking turns all night long to lay compresses, because they knew, and I knew, come in the morning, I have to go to work. And I did. I don't know how, but I did. It was maybe 10 days after that the orders came to liquidate the camp. Out of 1,550 men, we were 118 left, and we were taken to the infamous Dachau. As we walked into Dachau, we were greeted by the welcoming committee that consisted of 4 gallows with men hanging there. We continued to walk through the infamous gate that says Arbeit macht frei. That means work would set you free. And we kept walking into the showers, where the showers were next door to the showers there would be gas chambers and crematoriums. When we came in, before we took the showers, we were told to completely undress, and we came in, we waited for the water to come out. At that time, we already heard about the infamous Adolf Eichmann, who had the cyclone gas. And the cyclone gas, it was a can for maybe 49 cents or whatever, that killed 1,000 people. So we really didn't know if water's going to come out or gas, because the men were not in great shape, to say the least. But somehow the water came out, we took the showers, we went back to the blocks, and then we were sent to another camp about a week later called Mildorf. In Mildorf, I was assigned to work in a quarry, and I got sick. I came down with dysentery. This is a terrible disease. I mean, I'm not going to even attempt to describe, but I can tell you, you don't want to eat, you don't want to drink, or all you really want to do is die. And so they took me into the sick bay. After 2 or 3 days, I was okay. It was God's miracle. And realizing that nothing good can happen to me if I stay in a sick bay, I went over to the officer in charge, and I told him, I'd like to go back to the labor camp. I'm fine, I'm good, I'm ready to go to work. He says, you cannot allow me to do that, because the orders came that the camp was under quarantine because they found typhoid. And so about 10 days later or so, the camp we were told that we're going to be sent into the central typhoid camp. So again, we were brought into the cattle cars when they sealed the door on the cattle car. And I looked around. These people around me were all half dead. And I really believed that this was my final trip. And I said the Shema, which in the Jewish faith is like the final prayer. And I fell asleep from exhaustion. In the morning, the train came to a stop. I looked to the cracks of the cattle car, and there was a camp there. And I was saying, my good God, why would they save these people when they killed tens of thousands of healthy men and women? I don't have an answer, but they took us down into the central typhoid camp. And by that time, this was already the spring, or the beginning of the spring of 1945. Because the winter of 1944, half of the Jewish people, of the 6 million, were killed that winter. That was just brutal. And not to mention, in Second World War, there were 72 million people perished. But I don't want to go into that. Anyway, in the beginning of the spring of 1945, the orders came of the infamous death marches. All the camps in Germany were ordered to march south, all the way south to the German-Austrian border. There was a town called Mittenwald, and right outside is a huge forest called Tyrol, Tyrol. And that, according to Eichmann, would be the final destination. Now, his plan, Adolf Eichmann had this plan, and he called it the final solution of the Jewish question. And the plan was for everybody in every camp in Germany and in Austria to march all the way south into Tyrol, and there we were supposed to be given soup which was poisoned, and by the time the American army would come in, there'd be nothing left but the Lund Mountain of ashes. The way the Almighty created us, a human body, it's hard to believe, everything burns, everything, and there's very little ashes left. Now our camp, these men, they couldn't stand up, not alone walk. So we were taken again, this huge train came, and we walked towards it, and they obviously ran out of cattle cars, so we were put on open coal car, and we were on our way south in Germany. As you know, Germany was divided four parts. The Russians had the east, the British the north, the French the west, and the Americans were in charge of the south. After 2 or 3 days being on the train, all of a sudden the train came to a stop. It was a village outside a village called Schwabhausen, which I shall never forget. And the reason the train came to a stop is because on the adjoining track there was a huge German Flakzug, a military train, which with anti-air force guns, the likes of which I never saw in my life. And so the Nazis were shielding themselves with us because the Americans tried very hard to disable this train. And as hard as they came, and they were trying very hard not to harm any of us. But like my car was almost across of a steam locomotives. These guns and whatever was so incredible heavy. I remember the train was pulled by 8 locomotives. And as I said, that the Americans did not try. They tried very hard not to harm any of us. But it was almost impossible. And they really wanted to stop that train, because they were shooting at them. And so there were a lot of casualties. They were laying all over the field. You could see parts of bodies, hands, and it was impossible. It's impossible to describe. And they had nothing to give us. Nothing. If somebody in camp, if somebody got very, very sick, they gave them like an imitation aspirin. They had nothing. And somehow, in the afternoon, they allowed us to go for water. Right? The village was less than a kilometer, which is maybe like a half a mile away. And so myself and 3 other friends, we started to walk. And as we walked, it was in the afternoon, and the skies turned black, and the heavy rains came down. And so the SS stormtroopers took shelter in the farmhouses, and there was nobody on the road. And so we kept walking and walking until we came into a German farmer who took us in, gave us some food, and hid us up in the hayloft. In the morning, he woke us up, and he said to us, one of our friends' was burning up from temperature. And he told us that less than a mile away, maybe a half a mile away, there's a convent or a cloister, and a Catholic cloister, and he said these people would help us. And so we made our way following the road in the forest. If a car came, we went down, and we got there way after midnight. I don't know what time it was, but it was very late. This huge, huge building that was the convent. Being I was the youngest, I volunteered to knock on the door. I knocked on the door opened up, there was a nun. I didn't have to say anything. She said, "Come in, my child." I said, "Well, there are 3 other friends laying there in the woods, in the forest." So I went to get him. And we took off our clothes. I can tell you my shirt was saturated with lice. I mean, and they burned all the clothes. And I took a hot bath with soap. I didn't want to go out of the bathtub. I mean, it was years since I took a hot bath. And they gave us clothing, and the Bernard brothers came, and they took us away and they hid us. It was on the morning of April 28th of 1945 that the Bernard brothers came and told us that the Americans are very, very close, the American army, and there might be some shooting, and we'll be much safer in the basement. So they took us down to the basement. I got a hold of a apple crate, and I looked down to the little window, and I saw the first American tank coming up the hill. How can I possibly describe to you the jubilation in my heart, knowing that this unbelievable nightmare was over? And now, 71 years later, and 4 generations strong, I stand before you a very proud and grateful man, grateful for the opportunity this greatest country in the world gave me to start a new life, to raise a family, and to live in freedom and liberty. I must take this opportunity to thank the members of the American Armed Forces for their bravery and their sacrifices in fighting to liberate Europe and to make it possible for me to be here today. In conclusion, in the name of all those who perished, and on behalf of the survivors who are no longer with us, I beseech you, never forget the Holocaust. Thank you very much.
So you went through this for so many years. At what point did you finally feel safe? Was it like whenever you first saw the soldiers, or did it take a while?
Well, to be honest, once I came to America, I definitely felt very safe. But it took a long, long time to get used to it, to get used to the fact that I was free and I was in this great country. And every time that the thunder, I used to jump. So it took a long time. I used to get nightmares for many, many nights, but lately it's much better. But it's, like I said before, it's almost impossible to describe the conditions in the camps and in the ghettos, and to be privileged to live in this greatest country in the world. It was a miracle, and I'm forever grateful.
What is your opinion on how Hollywood portrays experiences like yours, and are they accurate?
What is your opinion about how Hollywood portrays your experiences in movies, and are they accurate?
I realized that Hollywood is great. I mean, they can do almost anything. But the few movies that were made, it's almost impossible to describe properly. I mean, where do you get men who weigh 60 or 80 pounds? I mean, how can you possibly do that? So that was sort of accurate in many ways, but some of them Hollywood show, and they made, like I said, it must be impossible to tell or to properly film or illustrate or tell the story of what had, because what took place during the Holocaust, it's beyond human comprehension. So they tried, and some of them, it's better than nothing, so people should never forget it. And we have to make sure that something like that should never happen, not only to the Jewish people, but to no other people on earth.
Do you ever have a grudge against Germans because of the Holocaust?
Do you ever hold a grudge against the Germans because of the Holocaust?
No, I don't. I don't have any hatred in my heart to anybody. And how can I possibly blame the grandchildren for the crimes of their grandfather? But I never lived with hate in my heart, because I could have never made it until today. I have only love and understanding. I don't have any hatred. No, I don't.
Are you in contact with any of the Holocaust survivors? Specifically anyone you befriended in camps or the ghetto?
Say it again.
Are you in any contact with any Holocaust survivors or any of your friends from the ghetto or anything?
That's a very sad question, because the reality is it's 71 years after the liberation. They simply said, if somebody was 21 years old, he's 92. There are very few survivors that are still with us. We go down, my wife and I go down for the winter to Florida, because the cold weather is very difficult for me. And there were a lot of them who settled in South Florida because of the weather. It's much easier. And there are very, very few left. So this is the reality of life, but I'm very sorry to tell you there are very few survivors. I look at my telephone book, and there's almost nobody that I have to call. I have one or two friends, and that's about it. So, but like I said, it's 71 years after liberation.
Mr. Morris, what do you imagine would have happened if you and your family had stayed in hiding in the Lowe's ghetto?
What would you imagine would have happened if you would have stayed in the Lowe's ghetto instead of gone?
Well, actually, this is not correct. We were hiding in Paviani's ghetto. And we were in a basement with several families, and at night we used to come out to get some fresh air, but the SS was going around the ghetto with loudspeakers, and they were warning us. They said if anybody would get caught, they would get killed. And we heard many executions. We heard a lot of people were killed. So the young people said we should surrender. And so I remember my father, he said, we're going to take it to a vote. And it was a secret ballot, and anyway, the majority, especially the children, felt that if they catch us, we're dead. But if we go and volunteer, they send us to a camp or to another ghetto, whatever. I mean, we never imagined that there's such a place as Auschwitz or crematoriums. So we decided to get out from the hiding basement, and we were taken and eventually sent to Auschwitz.
If you could only give one bit of advice to teenagers in light of your experiences, what would it be?
If you were to give one bit of advice to teenagers in light of your experiences, what would it be?
Whatever you do, whatever your belief is, politically or otherwise, you must stand up and defend not only this country but freedom in the world. This is the most important thing in life, to be free. And I appreciated it so much, I can't even put it into words. But whatever you have to do, when you get the call or when you have the opportunity, remember, defend freedom, because this is the most valuable thing in your life.
I'm going to ask a question. Can you describe for the students what it was like to be in the train cars? That experience and how long you were on some of those trains?
Can you describe your experience on the train cars and how long it was that you were on them?
Oh, jeez. The condition in the cattle cars are beyond the description. We were in it for, I would say it took between 4 or 5 days at least, going from Lodz into Auschwitz. And there were like 80 people, and all we had is a pail of water and a pail we were given just a little bit of bread, and then after 2 or 3 days we were given another slice of bread. It was a miracle how we made it through, but it's impossible to describe the conditions in those cattle cars. So.
On behalf of my students, I'd like to thank you for coming today, sharing your story. Thank you, sir.